Welcome to this Green Recovery Festival session, which is a spotlight talk with Solitaire Townsend. We always like to hear from Solly at the crowd, so great to have you with us today. And in this talk, Solly's going to be exploring how to be a solutionist in response to COVID-19, what organisations need to do in order to overcome some of the challenges and obstacles that they're now facing as a result of the pandemic. And she'll also reflect on some companies and individuals that she's worked with and give some examples of the best tactics, tricks and strategies for the most effective change makers in the business. So it should be a good session. I'll hand over to Solly in a minute, but before I do so, just a bit of an explanation on the crowd for anyone leaders who's not particularly familiar with us. And we're all about exploring and exchanging ideas on corporate sustainability and responsible business issues. And we're hosting this Green Recovery Festival. It's on until the 26th of November, a fortnight of talks and panels, interactive sessions around how the COVID-19 recovery can be aligned with this transition to a low carbon future. We're actually delighted. We're hosting a really nice wide variety of topics with lots of experts across this week and next week. So yeah, it should be good. Hope you can join us for some of the other sessions as well. In terms of the format for this session, so I'll hand over to Solly in a moment, and after her introductory remarks, we will open up to a Q&A. So please do ask questions. Ask them via the Q&A function box. Don't forget to say who you are, and if you want to, name your organisation. We're also streaming on YouTube and social media channels. Hello for you joining us through there. If you want to ask questions, feel free to do so. We just say use hashtag the crowd and hashtag Solitaire Townsend, and we'll feed those questions into the session here. A very quick but a very big thank you to our sponsors, Charities Aid Foundation, Adams and the RIBA. So without you guys, the crowd wouldn't be here. So thank you very much. And if you'd like to find out more about sponsorship of the crowd events and our COP26 related activities next year, please do get in touch. Okay, so now to introduce our spotlight speaker, Solitaire Townsend. Solly has been a passionate change maker for over 30 years. As co-founder of Futerra, she advises governments, charities and brands, including Google, IKEA and the United Nations, on imagining a better future and making it happen. She admits that making the world a better place is a damn good business plan. I couldn't agree more. Solly, over to you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Tiffany, and hello everybody. I can see participants joining. I can see online as well. We've got quite a lot of people. Some of you may know me. Some of you may be my friends. Some of you, this might be the first time that you've ever heard from me. So I'm a long-standing supporter and friend of the crowd. I'm a long-standing workhorse for sustainability and corporate sustainability. And I have a whole set of things I'm very comfortable talking about, and examples and proof points. And I decided not to do that today. And that what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about you. We're going to talk about the participants on this call, the people who are working day in, day out in their kitchens and their bedrooms and their home offices, if they're lucky, around the UK and around the world, plugging away at corporate sustainability and making it happen. And I'm going to share some insights about what I've found that works for organisations, but crucially, organisations don't make decisions. Organisations don't do anything. People do. It's people within those organisations, the people such as the people on this call today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've discovered about what makes an effective change maker inside organisations, including some of the bloody great mistakes I've seen people make, as well as the successes and what makes success. And I'm really open to questions. I'm going to name some names of individuals I've worked with and how they make change and how their organisations make change. I'm also going to tell a few stories where I won't name the names of mistakes that I've seen happen. Just a word first about who Futerra is. So why do I have the right to sit here and tell you what makes a solutionist? So as of this year, Futerra is 19 years old. So we've been around for almost 2 decades, and we are a change agency. And what we mean by a change agency is that we exist to make sustainability so desirable it becomes normal. And that desirability works for corporates desiring it from a business case perspective, consumers desiring it from a lifestyle perspective, policymakers desiring it from an infrastructure perspective, and all of us doing so. I could go on that list, because our philosophy at Futerra is very much based around optimism, positivity, and a vision of what we can all achieve together. And the vision, of course, is 7 to 10 billion healthy, free, educated human beings living in a recovering natural environment. And by the way, it took me quite a lot of work to be able to say that sentence, because so rarely do we articulate the vision of what we're trying to achieve. 7 to 10 billion healthy, educated, free human beings living in a recovering natural world. So how does Futerra try to do that? There's 2 sides of our business, and we're 70 people around the world. We've got an office here in London, an office in New York, one in Stockholm, and one in Mexico City. And one side of our business is logic. So that's the logic is working on the big commitments, the goals, the targets, the infrastructure, sort of the consultancy bit. And that's working with folks such as Google, who I'm going to talk about some more, working with folks such as Formula One to help them commit to their net zero, Tommy Hilfiger with their Make It Possible commitments, etc. So a lot of sort of big global commitment setting. The other side of what we do, we call the magic. So if that's the logic, this is the magic. And the magic is the marketing, the messaging, the storytelling for people such as L'Oreal and Lancome, for PepsiCo, and all the way through to doing their advertising campaign in the US for Fridays for Future, for the school strikes. So we balance both. We work a lot with big corporates, but we also work with the NGOs and with the governments as well. And we are a proud B Corp, and I'm happy to answer any questions about what a wonderful pain in the arse it is becoming a B Corp. It's really worth doing, but it ain't easy. So, and over the years, over 20 years of working to make both sides of that happen, both the logic and the magic, I've learned a few things. One of the biggest things that I've learned is that it all comes down to people. It comes down to supply and demand. So how willing people are inside business to make big change, and how much their key stakeholders, particularly their customers or consumers, depending on whether they're B2B or B2C, really want it. First thing to say is right now, at the moment, despite or perhaps even because of the coronavirus, which has changed all of our lives, for some of us, changing how we work, our work circumstances, for other people, absolutely tragically changing their lives in terms of their work lives, their home lives, or even losing loved ones. Because or despite of this, there is quite a fundamental change happening around the world in how people regard their place in the world and the world around them. We're seeing a growing extremism. We're seeing a growing hyperbole in terms of how people express their opinions. We're seeing cancel culture beginning to extend to businesses as well as to celebrities on the internet. But underneath all of that, underneath all of the, shall we say, the noise that you get if you go onto Twitter, onto social media, we're also seeing some pretty stable views on that demand. So, for example, about a month ago, we surveyed 1,000 people in the UK and 1,000 people in the US, and we asked them whether they would be prepared to make as big lifestyle changes to stop climate change as they have to stop coronavirus. We were expecting that to maybe be about 30 to 50% of people in the UK saying yes, less in the US. Actually, what we had was over 80% in both markets saying that they'd be prepared to make as big changes to stop climate change as coronavirus. We actually ran the survey twice because we didn't believe it the first time that we ran it. We then went on to ask people what changes they're prepared to make. Lots of people prepared to make changes to waste and how they waste and plastics. Some, about 50%, around what they buy in terms of food, etc., and travel. Smaller numbers being prepared to demand change from governments, but I think that's possibly more about people's willingness to demand change from governments on anything rather than climate change. And only 5%, and we asked rural as well as city, we asked men, women, all political shades, only 5% of people in the UK and the US saying that they weren't willing to make any changes. Much more importantly than that finding, encouraging as it is, was the finding that half of people, 50% of people, felt that the changes that they wanted to the changes that they were willing to make would be good for their quality of life. It would improve their quality of life. 37% saying it would make no change, and in their teens saying that it would make their life worse. So we've got that demand there. People want to make these changes to their lifestyle. They want what you're selling on sustainability. So why does that tension, why does all of this survey work, which again said that we've got, should we say, the market need from consumers, why does again and again that kind of cause a tension? So one of the people who I think understands that tension the best is Erin Meason. So Erin Meason is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Interface. Many of us on this call grew up with Interface as being sort of, the small carpet company that could. And we grew up with Ray Anderson's words ringing in our heads around what the world needed. Those were some pretty big shoes to fill. And whilst the CEOs, as have been, of Interface, have all since Ray Anderson been great proponents of this, arguably Erin Meason has been the key pivotal person in that organisation who has pushed for change. So what can Erin teach us about what it means to be a change maker? Erin's number one attribute, I would say, beyond being a lovely human being, is tenacity. Absolute tenacity. Erin does not let go. So when Interface was coming close to achieving its mission zero, its zero footprint, which by the way is itself a huge win, easily Interface could have sort of bumped along for years afterwards, celebrating what they'd have achieved and building some incremental improvements upon it. Interface's reputation of being a sustainability leader is set. What Erin decided to do, whilst there was a change going on at the top of their organisation, the CEO of their organisation, she pushed for a massive step up in their ambition, indeed, to that their corporate ambition should be to reverse climate change. We worked with her on that, the Climate Take Back, and what she put forward was the fact that their B2C clients, particularly in the built environment sector, were looking for something that they could say very strongly to their consumers, to the corporates who inhabit their buildings, that they were looking for something absolutely beyond what was already in the marketplace, that they wanted something which was a mission, a promise that just went beyond anything that anybody was saying, that in order to maintain Interface's predominance in the market, they needed to go beyond their legacy. And hence the commitment to take back climate. Not an easy sell for Erin internally, really difficult, both in terms of some people saying that's not possible, some people saying we don't have the right to play in that area, some people saying, well, can't we just talk for a while about what we've achieved? What Erin knows is just talking about what you've achieved so far is never enough. One of my frustrations as an advisor to big organisations is when they come to me and say, we just need to talk more about what we're already doing. We really need people to know about what we're already doing. We just don't get the credit for what we're already doing. That just always makes me roll my eyes back, because never going to happen. If what you were doing already was compelling enough to your marketers, to your teams, to your consumers, they would already know. This is not the reason why what you're already doing isn't out there proud enough, is that it's not enough. Not necessarily because you haven't put enough effort in, or because there's more that you could be doing, but because what you're achieving always needs to be within the framework of what you intend to achieve next. Because when it comes to sustainability, looking backwards doesn't work. Almost no audience that I work with is interested in reviewing the pathway that you looking down the pathway and clapping you, celebrating you for what you've already achieved. Everybody wants to look forward. And that brings me to the next person who I've learned a great deal of, which is Kate Grant, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Google. Again, another very tenacious woman. One of the other things which Kate does extremely well is socialization, is getting her organization on board before anything is ever announced. Now, I have in the last 2 years had 2 scenarios with large global corporates, we're talking multi-billion-dollar corporates, where the very passionate sustainability team internally sort of tried to run a underground sustainability program because they didn't trust that their boss's boss would sign off what they were trying to do. And so tried to sort of get something out that was very ambitious on sustainability without having done the socialization first. And in both cases, it got kiboshed, held back. Eventually, in one case, it ended up happening a year later. Again, I have seen this so many times, which is when you, as a sustainability change maker, are more ambitious than your boss or your boss's boss's boss or your boss's boss's boss. And so are trying to, almost like a teenager, push against the boundaries that your parents are setting to see how far you could go. And unfortunately, it very rarely works. So what Kate does spectacularly inside Google is go right up and down and across the chain. I'll give you an example. So we're working with Kate on the Google circularity strategy and on the white paper that came with it. Google always produces quite a long technical white paper about sustainability, about any sustainability announcement that it makes. They're very technically minded. Once we've done the first draft of that for them, she then opens it for comment from hundreds of people across Google, from the CFO, from the marketing team, all the way up to Sundar, the CEO. And she puts it in a Google Doc and everybody's allowed to comment. So their fingerprints are everywhere. By the way, if you're one of the team working to support her to finalize that, it's terrifying because you've got thousands of comments, hundreds of commenters. Everybody has had their word, has been completely open sourced to any decision maker internally to be able to have their word. However, her absolute genius is she then goes through each one of those comments, each one of those, almost always critiques, and replies back to the comment in the Google Doc. Great comment, please suggest alternative language. What then happens is that 75% of the comments disappear because actually someone was happy to critique, but they didn't want to create. And then you get down to the comments which actually really do need to be dealt with, and then where there's really genuine changes that need to be made. What that means is that whenever anything comes out of Google, whenever anything is published by Google in such a crucial big organization, every single person is on board from the top of the organization to the bottom. And all of those people who didn't comment were offered the chance. And so, she plays into that human piece, which is even if you didn't get your act together to actually comment on the document, you've been part of it. So I think that is a really beautiful example of how to get past the politics. One of the things which I am not seeing at the moment, which I really wish I was seeing, one of the things which people are really struggling with inside my clients is silos between social and environmental. So we've got this, particularly in Western Europe and in North America, we've got these 2 huge things which are happening. Phone calls coming to Futerra every day. One is, social sustainability, particularly around race and intersectionality. It's not something which I would count myself as an expert on, although I am recruiting for experts at the moment on this. The issues about racial justice, about racial equity, about climate justice, huge, Black Lives Matter, huge conversation going on inside corporates and without, putting a real challenging time, particularly for marketeers in terms of how to tell the story of the organisation and whether there is one to say. The other really big conversation happening, of course, is the whole climate change, regenerative agriculture, huge conversations about diversity, water, etc. Often inside my clients, those are run in two separate departments and have been done for some time. Usually sitting on the same floor or on the same Zoom, but very, very rarely integrated. Often separate pillars in the strategy, separate parts of the sustainability report, and the touch points between those, particularly the environmental justice touch point between those, is something which I really think people are struggling with at the moment. What I would say is this is a real opportunity for sustainability people. Number one, go and get yourself trained up. Get yourself trained up on anti-bias, get yourself trained up on anti-racism. There are so many great resources out there right now, because this pivot point between the environmental and the social, and particularly between race, equity, poverty, smallholder farmers, environmental issues, climate change issues, this is the pivot point which is going to unlock sustainability for a great deal of people inside your organisation and without. There's just one final point that I wanted to make about the most successful people that I've worked with, and it's, you know, from Sky to Vodafone to MSC to P&G, UNET, Tommy Hilfiger, Yux Net-a-Porter, Danone. One of all the people that I've worked with, the people who succeed, the people who manage to make change inside their organizations and without, are the people with a support network. A support network inside the organization, and mentors, people who support them, network within the organization, a support network of usually young people coming up with inside their organization, and crucially a support network outside of the organization, somewhere to go and bitch and moan about how hard it is being a sustainability person, to learn and to inspire, which is where things such as the crowd are so important. It is lonely being a sustainability person, and it is particularly lonely being a sustainability person stuck at home during a pandemic. So things such as the crowd, where we get to interact with each other, where we get to share, and we get to complain, and we get to learn, and we get to feel a sense of belonging and community, and the fact that we're not weird. Well, we are weird, but we're amongst the weird. This is absolutely precious for being able to maintain over time. So many of the people that I've mentioned, many of the organizations I've mentioned, they're my clients, they're also my friends, and they're also my support network for the change that I'm trying to make. And without that, I don't think any of us would be able to stick at this for any time. So that was a little bit of a talk through of what I see it takes: tenacity, really smart political understanding, increasing understanding of the intersectionality between environmental and social, and a support network of people who will support you, lift you up, and who you lift up. Tiffany, I hope that there's some questions, because this is not what I usually talk on, and I'd love to hear what people have to say.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Solly. That was great. I was taking a few notes as you were going along. And great that you mentioned Erin and Kate. Actually, we're also big fans of Erin and Kate at the crowd. Yeah, we have a couple of questions come in. I've got one as well, which I'd quite like to ask you. I thought of whilst you were speaking. And I'll tie a couple in. So, and you mentioned lots of different companies in your talk just then. And I was wondering whether you see if there's any kind of businesses or organisations, you mentioned corporates, NGOs and governments that you work with, are there any which are more receptive to your approach than others? And then alongside that, what do you think are the biggest differences in business approaches to the risk from COVID-19 versus those of climate change?
I think both those questions have got quite a lot in common, because the types of organisations, be they NGOs or businesses, the types of organisations which are most receptive to working on sustainability, for me, are the ones who are most receptive to the outside world. insular organizations who are internally focused, navel gazing, often convinced of their own internal whiteness, and often quite, I can always tell that a client's going to be a difficult client when I turn up, we have a first conversation, and they tell me why all their critics are wrong about them. And they've got all their talking points about what and how they need to educate the consumer and educate the NGOs and educate government about why they're wrong about their business. I always know that that's a sign that this is a company in trouble, because none of us are perfect. If anybody on the line thinks they're perfect, please do contact me, because I'd love to have a case study of a perfect company. But all of us have got serious failings, because our infrastructure, our system has serious failings at the moment, and we all operate within it. So the companies that I deal with who are the fastest moving on this and are able to make advantages and make business value out of sustainability, not just risk management, are the ones who are the most open to the outside world. They do lots of outside ins, they do lots of bringing in critics, they have quite a, they have employees coming in and going out, they don't have too much staticness internally. And that goes for any type of organization. The other type of organization that works extremely well are the ones who are using their legacy to jump off to the future. So ones who talk about how they were founded, talk about their legacy, and talk about how that prepares them for the big next challenge that they're trying to take on, and what they're going to take what's true to them forward. And I think a great example of that is Tommy Hilfiger with their Make It Possible, which is they have this wonderful history, Tommy Hilfiger, of producing clothing that's adapted to disabled people, particularly to people who use wheelchairs. Before I worked with them, I had no idea how problematic it is to get nice looking clothes if you're in a wheelchair. You're able to get on and get off, and with zips in the right places and which aren't uncomfortable. Great, adaptive line. What they so proud of that, so wanted to talk about that, and they jumped off from that adaptive line to making inclusion, diversity, intersectionality on race and gender one of their very big looking forward targets. By the way, they're not as good at that. They've got the same challenges as everybody has about their pay gaps, about their senior leadership. They've got challenges they've got to work on. But rather than saying, well, we need to just keep telling the world about our adaptive clothing line, they're like, actually, no, we've proven to ourselves we could do that. And that now shows us that we can jump off into the future. So there's a red thread running through that, from we can adapt to what the outside world needs, to going, actually, we're going to have to adapt again to intersectionality and inclusion going forward.
Brilliant. Thanks, Solly. We've got a few more questions coming in. Jim has asked whether you have any thoughts on the moral and business case for sustainability, and how should this case be presented to management? That's something we hear a lot.
So I'm lucky enough to get to spend quite a lot of time in boardrooms, often as the puppet of the sustainability team who know that the messages that they've been saying to the senior management comes across so much more impactfully when someone outside the organization tells management. So we often have a plot together of how I'm literally going to repeat what they've been saying to the board for a long time, but in a very compelling external way. Moral case and business case. The fact that those are two different things is itself a comment on how we run our world. I create business cases and I help to promote business cases, particularly around consumer engagement, all of which are true, in order to give permission for people to take a moral decision. So what we almost always come across, very rarely do I come across an absolute arsehole in business. Almost always senior management teams, boards are made up of people who would very much like to do this. They've got kids, they read the newspaper, they would very much like to do this. They need permission to do so. So the stronger the business case, the more robust the business case, and by the business case, I don't mean look at these 20 slides about how great sustainability is and how well it worked. I mean, a business case for your business that has been worked through based on your market, on what is happening in your products, what is happening on the ground in your numbers. So a business case that they'd see for anything else. So not a business case for the planet, a business case for your business. I show those, we work through them in depth, and those business cases give the permission for the moral decision. I very rarely go in and give a moral case alone, not used to, honestly, but really don't need to anymore. People already know the moral case. They're already worried, their kids are already shouting at them. They need that business case to cover their arse with their bosses and their investors to show that this is actually something that's going to prove. The biggest mistake that people make is then deciding that they're going to work through the infrastructure changes inside their organization before they start marketing based on this. I have clients who have waited 3, 4, 5 years to start integrating their sustainability commitments into their marketing messages, and that starts to erode internally, because until you start making this something that's part of your selling proposition, you're not going to get any return on your investment. And once you do make it part of your selling proposition, number one, that's a great business case. And number two, you've made a promise to your consumers, and then you're going to keep it.
Great, thank you. Going back to the point you mentioned in your opening remarks about the cross-silo collaborations, Edward has asked, should we use the global goals as a core yardstick for cross-silo collaboration? And then he's just posted another question now. Do we view the UN SDGs as the most important plans for the planet, or the best we've got for the time being plans?
So I am a huge SDG cheerleader. I was very lucky to be one of the consultees on SDG 12 as it was being developed. The SDGs for me are the absolute best that we've got, 100% the best that we've got. And they are the to-do list for the planet. There's loads of bits and pieces missing, let's be honest, within them, but overall, they are the absolute, they're up on the wall in Futerra. We also, because as Futerra was so committed to activating individuals on this, because we think there really needs to be that demand side sustainability, we even translated them into the Good Life Goals, and the Good Life Goals are a set of individual actions that individuals can take against the 17 SDGs. And we did that with the UN. So, do search Good Life Goals. The problem with the SDGs is they are also siloed. There are 17 of them, and each of their beautiful colours. And what we see is people inside people's sustainability reports, you see them almost as if there's a sort of smorgasbord of kind of going, here's SDG 7 and SDG 12, and we've got SDG 2 and SDG 5 over here. So one of the challenges with the SDGs is that they actually lend themselves to siloing. And so they are an extremely good way to remind yourself and of the overall to-do list for the planet. But if you really want to start breaking down those barriers between the social and the environmental and start actually creating integrated solutions, I would encourage you to more look at things such as intersectional sustainability, environmental justice, this new emerging language, which of course there is new language since the SDGs were written, this new emerging language which actually puts the social justice and the environmental necessity together.
Great, yeah, and probably linked to this as well, Clement's just asked, what about the people who don't have sustainability in their job title? So do you have any examples of how sustainability can be integrated across other roles and other business verticals? Yeah.
If you don't have sustainability in your job title, well done. That actually, honestly, sometimes having sustainability in your job title can be challenging, because it means that people are making a decision, an assumption about you and what you're going to care about and what you're allowed to work on in advance. So again, another of the most fantastic change makers I know is Valerie Hernandez-Prese from Danone. She is CMO. She's also one of the very few women of colour who is a CMO in France. And Valerie actually had a sustainability job title in the past, and then she moved to the CMO job title. And what I find is that she's able to get a damn sight more done with the CMO job title, because there is an automatic assumption that she cares about money. There's an automatic assumption that she primarily is interested in the business case, which means she doesn't have to prove that. She doesn't sort of have to prove her business credentials before anyone will listen to her. And I think that makes her a fantastic change maker internally. So I very much congratulate anybody on this call who doesn't have sustainability in their job title, because it means that you already automatically have the assumption within your business that you are a business person. Whereas still we've got a hangover that people who work in sustainability are considered to care about sustainability first and everything else second, which is also probably true, but that's a side issue. So if you don't have sustainability in your job title, you are the absolutely most effective person to make sustainability happen in your organization. You are our secret weapon. You are the change maker in disguise, because you likely will be listened to and have more power and influence over parts of the business that don't have sustainability stamped on them already.
Great. Yeah, we have a question from Caroline actually about the research that you mentioned in your opening remarks, and actually it is fantastic to hear that over 80% of those people who you asked were willing to make those changes. That's a really positive start. Caroline said, so obviously lots of people are prepared to make that change due to COVID, but there is this emerging sense of polarization amongst the public. So those in favour of limiting their behaviours, those who aren't. The same applies to attitudes to sustainable living. So we're seeing similar patterns there. Do you have any insights into overcoming those divides at all?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you look at mask wearing, for example. So those of us who have spent years trying to get people to recycle, trying to get people to give blood, trying to get people to volunteer, trying to get people to use less product, shower for sure, all of those sustainable behaviours, commute less, fly less, eat less meat. Those who are willing to wear masks and those who are not willing to wear masks, I think it's been really interesting. One of the most interesting things about it is the numbers show the vast majority of people are willing to wear masks. The vast majority of the conversation is about those who are not. So just for a minute, reflect on what that means for sustainability. So when you go onto social media and you search for eating less meat for the environment, I can't remember what the organisation was, but whoever proposed that there should be a tax on meat, I think that happened about a week and a half ago. If you went onto social media, you would think that this was a 50-50 argument for and against that kind of thing. Probably even slightly more against, because the noise around those hating on the idea of a meat tax was equal, if not louder. The same goes for mask wearing and not mask wearing. The vast majority of people wear a mask and don't talk about it. A small group of people don't wear a mask, and everybody who doesn't wear a mask talks about it and why they're not, and not least because they get stopped in the street. And a small number of people do wear masks and are very vocal about wearing masks. So don't get tricked into thinking that this polarization that we see on social media, this polarization of the discourse, means that there is necessarily a polarization within society. There is on some subjects, but what we find on sustainable behaviors is the biggest problem with sustainable behaviors, the biggest problem of taking action on sustainability, is people want you, brands, to stop telling them to do so and start helping them to do so. So you remember that statistic that over half of people think this will be good for their quality of life? This is marketing gold. You've got a thing that a vast majority of people think is going to be good for them. It's going to be a benefit that they want to do, and they want your help to do it. So we recently worked with P&G on their new refills commitment, and this was on the Magic side on how they're going to message that, where they are working on the biggest challenge that we have in household recycling is recycling in the bathroom, because nobody does it. We all recycle in our kitchen, or many of us do. We're very good about that. We increasingly recycle our food waste. But the shampoo and conditioner goes into the bathroom bin. The bathroom bin is gross, and you're not going to dig back around it and then get it back out in order to put it into the kitchen bin. So rather than run campaign after campaign telling people they should recycle in their bathroom, rather than putting big messages on their product saying, please recycle me, or you can recycle me, rather than telling people they should care, people don't recycle in their bathroom because they forget, and because they're naked when they finish the shampoo bottle, and because there's so many actual genuine behavioural barriers to them taking action. So instead, what P&G has done is invent a refillable bottle. So actually they've created the solution, and that's going to be so successful. And we've got a fantastic campaign waiting for it. Really, really successful. That was announced a couple of weeks ago. So that's in terms of people they want to take these behaviours. They think they're beneficial to them. The vast majority of people will quite happily take them. Your job is to make it easy for them, not to tell them they should care. They already care. They've been telling us that they care for years. They want help, not to be told that they should feel guilty.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a good question coming from Maggie Adams. She's asked, when designing marketing campaigns, how do you strike that balance between being ambitious and optimistic about the organisation's fledgling sustainability work or their plans, and greenwashing? So how do you strike that balance?
It's really interesting. So sustainability rots marketeers' brains. I'm absolutely convinced of it. We work alongside the big agencies, the big ad agencies, the big marketing agencies. We don't replace them. We work alongside them to help develop the messaging and the marketing, and they go and activate it around the world. I don't have people sitting in Russia or etc. to help activate this. And they're getting much better at it. But consumers listen. I'm convinced consumers listen to sustainability messages with a different part of the brain to the one that they listen to with about general marketing messages. So just think about beauty adverts for a moment. How much beauty wash is absolutely all over the place. They literally hire people who genetically don't look like the rest of us to be the faces of it. They use eye curlers of people who've got eyelashes up here. Absolutely, completely unobtainable ideals in beauty messaging, and we're all like, meh. It's like, yeah, I know, I don't mind. I'm still going to buy that product and not that product. I'm coming at these messages sort of girded, understanding the transaction that's going on here. When it comes to sustainability messages, even the slightest halo of greenwash, the slightest sense that you might be being lied to, oversold, is a real problem. So what we do when we're designing the messages around corporates is we sidestep that entirely. The craziest and yet truest thing that you can try to get your marketers to understand about sustainability marketing is nobody gives a shit about you. There is not a consumer on the planet, there's not a member of the public on the planet who cares about what you have done, however much you want to tell them. Nobody is sitting there to go woohoo to global businesses, big or small. They care about themselves. They care about themselves, how guilty they feel. They don't want to know about how you have reduced your packaging by 25%. They want you to make them feel less guilty about doing their recycling or not doing their recycling. So the biggest, most successful thing you can do, and the most successful thing we've ever done with our clients, is switch their marketing messages around from brand as hero to consumer as hero. So how can you, and that gets you out of greenwashing completely, by the way, because when you stop talking about yourself and start talking about the consumer and about how brilliant she is and how fantastic and how much she cares and how much of a difference she's able to do and how much you're there to serve her, which, by the way, is what you do in all the rest of your marketing anyway. In all the rest of your marketing, you talk about how amazing the consumer is and how you're helping her. In sustainability, suddenly it becomes this hugely hubristic desire to tell the world about your 14% reduction in packaging weight or your net zero commitment that you're making. Nobody cares. You can talk about all of that, however, you can tell the consumer all of it in reference to her and how it's making her a better person and more heroic person. So the answers in the question, basically, don't greenwash by not telling anyone about yourself, and instead tell the consumer about how everything you've done is in order to enable her to have a better impact.
Great, thanks, Sally. An interesting question from an anonymous attendee. How can governments, policymakers, international institutions best support the innovation and positive action which we see in the private sector?
That's not a little question, is it?
No.
No, particularly on today when we've got our new UK 10-point plan, which
yes, exactly,
I got halfway through reading. So I am not a fan of the get out of the way. I passionately believe that policymakers and the financial sector have got a really strong enabling environment. Two things that policymakers tend to do is raise the ceiling and raise the floor. So raising the floor means, following the same pathway that we had with smoking, which is to increasingly confine the areas of operation for destructive business practice. That we are going to see more and more of. Today we did have the commitment that by 2030, new petrol and diesel cars aren't going to be able to be sellable in this country. The raising the ceiling is reducing tariffs and creating an enabling environment for things such as EVs. So those two things. One of the things which I tend to see happen is quite a lot of raising the ceiling, quite a lot of incentives, investments going towards renewables, etc., without the raising the floor, without the actually making it a less advantaging environment for destructive industries. But I think with the commitments to net zero, hopefully with the change of administration in the US, we're going to begin to see that window of financially viable activity for businesses beginning to move upwards.
Yeah, great. We're 10 minutes away from ending, so I think we have time for another couple more questions. So another question coming in here: as a professional community, the corporate sustainability world is often quite undiverse. How do you think we can fix that? And then someone else has asked, how do you convince those who are accustomed to short-term thinking to take the longer-term view?
Okay, so thank you to whoever raised that point about the fact that we are we're really not a very diverse group. This week, Climate Week, I've done a lot of speeches. I started today doing a session with a bunch of young women in Mozambique about how to be change makers. And I realised that, and it was a small group, being on a small group with about 25 young women in Mozambique was the only session that I had done where well, actually that's not fair, because we did a Futerra session as well, which was diverse, a Futerra workshop. But oh my God, the number of panels that I do which are all white, or even the number of panels which I do where I'm the only woman, I would say is 99%. I've actually, as Futerra, we've made a commitment that we will not hold any panel which is all white. We've never had a problem with holding panels which are all male, because we're majority female owned and led, but we will no longer hold all white panels. We have got a racism problem in our sector. Now I say that, and I know there's a number of people online who might be offended or upset by saying that. I'm not saying that we're racists. I'm not saying that those who are working in the section, often very much the opposite. But to anybody, any young person of colour looking at our sector, really passionate about working in sustainability, it looks like community which is institutionally racist, just because the leadership positions are almost all held by white people. So I'm being quite aggressive with that terminology. As Futerra, I don't have the answer to that. I don't have the answer to it in my organisation. What I do have is a desire to speak truth about it and to work with those who are prepared to work with us, both to help improve us and to improve others. We are in the process of funding survey, a research piece of work with a number of organisations in the UK and elsewhere who support people of colour working in sustainability, to really understand and hear the voices of those who are trying to either get into this industry at a junior level or come into this industry from other parts of business, and to actually listen to those voices about what are the structural barriers that people are finding. Really, truly, really straightforwardly, why is it that the sector is so white when so many people of colour want to work within it? I suspect we'll find some of the same answers that I found when I started off in this sector 20 years ago, which was it was also really male, senior level, which is that it's going to take time, effort and commitment, and it's going to take people getting out of the way. So thank you for the question. And I wish I had a better answer, but I'm working really, really hard on finding them. On the short term versus long term, all of us human beings, we're both short term and long term. We're both thinking about what we're going to have for lunch, and we're also thinking about, where our food might come from in 20 years. Businesses operate on both levels, short term and long term. The one thing which I would say is go and make friends with this CFO. People always assume that their CFO in the finance function is going to be ultimately short term. Because they're literally producing the numbers that are quarterly numbers, etc. What I would say is that your CFO actually has got a fiduciary responsibility to think long term as well as short term, and that actually your CFO and your finance team can be your absolute best advocates for making sure that short-term shareholder value does not undermine the ability for long-term returns. And so few of my sustainability colleagues inside business have got that, they're really working with their CMO and with their marketing team. They're much better working with their operations team, but they do not have a really productive working relationship with their CFO and with the finance team, even though the only people in business who, particularly accountants, any accountants who are working in that, the only people in business who are actually trained to think long term as well as short term is the CFO and the finance team. So I would say if you really want to talk about long-term return on investment, go and talk to people whose job it is to actually police return on investment.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So 5 minutes to go, and we have a question here about the pandemic and how it has shown we can be agile. We've touched on this before, and how people are willing to make that change, and how can this best translate into climate action? And then just to round things off, I just wanted to also, I might put you on the spot a bit here, but building on your the research you've spoken about, where people are willing to make that change, what kind of positive future do you personally imagine for the next, let's say, 5 years?
Yeah. So we've got to tread really carefully around the conversations around COVID and climate action. COVID's a fucking nightmare. It is a tragic pandemic which is killing people right now. I don't want to save the world like this. Doesn't make sense. This is absolutely not what the plan was, to try to begin to change our infrastructure and how we work. And I think we have to be absolutely upfront about that in every conversation, because any implication that we think that this period of time where particularly our old, particularly our vulnerable, particularly communities of colour, and particularly those who are poor and those who are not nicely working from home, but are out there in essential jobs or food delivery people, our most exposure to a global pandemic is really unpleasant. So COVID sucks. We don't want it to happen. This is not how we want to make change, not least because this kind of change which we've all made, pivoting absolutely swiftly into our homes and changing our infrastructure, etc., wasn't planned. And so may not be sustainable in the long run, may not have the impact that it could have in terms of reducing travel, etc. So just want to put that absolutely up front. I'm also a fan of when life gives you lemons, trying to create a lemon farm. So if we are in this extraordinary situation, what it has done is reveal to a lot of populations around the world how our society functions. It's made people very interested in who makes their food, where their food comes from, who makes their clothes. It's actually made the essential work within our society much more visible. These are real opportunities to the problems that the pandemic has opened up has given us a real opportunity to make some quite swift changes in response to them. And one of the things which we are seeing particularly is a connection of higher income over consumers, such as those of us in the UK, with under consumers around the world, particularly where food comes from. So I think there's a real opportunity to change that. And then there are some of the big obvious ones. And there's no point really spending much time on them. We all know them. It's like, I ain't going back to flying the way I used to. Not least because none of my clients are going to demand that I do. This all functions completely fine. So there are some things which were going to happen anyway. They've just happened faster because of COVID. They haven't happened because of COVID. They've happened faster because of COVID. So that's one thing which I would say. In terms of the positive future, I'm so excited. I am so excited for what the next 10 years are going to hold, for the 2020s are going to hold. I really, really feel the story is changing. And human being, story matters to us, way more than technology or politics matters. We're built of stories, we are made of narratives. We are narrative creatures. We teach our children stories before we even teach them facts. The story is beginning to change around the world. The story of what a good life looks like, the story of what aspiration feels like, particularly in those populations which are more young than old, which is not here in the UK, but those young women that I was talking to this morning in Mozambique. These are all young women from villages where they may have been in danger of child marriage, where they may have been in danger of human trafficking, and they all have worked to get themselves out of that. And one of them was becoming a marine biologist, another was becoming a psychologist, somebody else was working in marketing. The story that they tell about the future that they expect, which is one of recovering biosphere and freedom and choice for people, that's the story that I'm prepared to buy into. Not my story, theirs. And so what I would say is, if you really, really want a vision of a positive future, go and ask some young people in a emerging company, or even in one of the MAPA and the most affected people and areas of climate change. Go and ask them of the positive future that they want and expect. You're going to get a much better answer from them than you are from me. We're just there to serve it now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Solly. What a nice positive end to the day. That's great. Thank you. And thanks to everyone for joining us. Sorry, that's all we have time for today. So whether you joined us here on Zoom or YouTube or social media, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I'm sure you did. As I mentioned earlier, we do have more events coming up. So the Green Recovery Festival is running until the 26th of November. Yeah. Beyond the festival, if you are interested in finding out what the crowd are up to, what we have planned for 2021 and our COP26 activities, please do get in touch with myself or one of my colleagues at the crowd. And one final big thank you to Solly, and thank you all for joining us today. And we hope that you can join us for more events soon.